Okay, so I want to take you guys through and do a few different techniques for doing Dynamesh. As I mentioned in class, I wanted to recap and do a few different touches on just a piece of geometry. And first of all, before anything, I'm going to just initialize ZBrush. This will take a second. And what initializing ZBrush does, if you look in the preferences, basically it just gives you a clean slate. So everything that we've been working on up until I would save it before you push it. Any tools, any projects, you might want to save them so that way you have a fresh start. And I want to grab just a 3D sphere, and holding shift I'm going to click and drag that into our space here. And then on the keyboard hit T, T being the edit key or hotkey for edit. And I'm going to, on the tool palette, click on make polymesh 3D, which turns it into a polymesh. You can tell, of course, got polyframes. It's a simple enough sphere. And going into creating something like a base mesh, of course, geometry. And I'm going to close modify topology and just look at my Dynamesh. So with Dynamesh, I want to set up something kind of simple. So I'm just going to go with a 64 resolution Dynamesh with zero blur and project. Actually, I don't need right now. Only when I start blocking in things and I have a little bit more detail to work with do I actually really need project. I think it's on by default, but you can turn it off. Just because I'm just going to be moving around and showing a few basic things. So I'm going to go ahead and click Dynamesh. And as soon as I did that, you could probably notice that the polyframes, the grid of the mesh has literally changed into a Dynamesh. Different poles, everything's not straight geometry, but that's quite alright. Okay, and of course, hitting B, M, grab move tool, sizing up the brush, and from go like this, after I've initialized, probably you need to make sure you can click on your transform and active symmetry is off. So I'm just going to hit X and get my active symmetry going back. Right? Now, one of the things, just a small technical thing if you're unfamiliar, is I'm going to turn on the floor and turn on perspective. And looking down here, it's kind of hard maybe to see on camera. Actually, let me do this. I'll go to the document folder and just under range, I'll turn the range all the way down. That way we just have a gray background. And if I rotate here, you see a very hairline indicator here that is red. And red would be the X side. Okay. Then if you turn again, it's probably right here. It's hard to see a little bit. If I scale maybe quite large. There's a small hairline here. In fact, let me bring my brush size down. There's a small hairline indicator here, which is also blue. And blue is the Z-axis forward. So if I get this orientated right, if I turn off perspective, so I'm just dealing with a straight orthographic view, you'll notice that this would be the front. If I hit X, there we go. You'll start to notice that as I size up this brush, I'm dealing with only just the sides. I'm going to turn local symmetry on. That way local symmetry actually is in effect for this object. And I'm just going to turn the floor off now that we know which way the orientation is. And I'm going to start to move. So just blocking out pieces is a fairly quick affair, especially for creating a model. You can pull out certain sections. Of course, if you've worked in Dynamesh before, you're probably familiar with this. It's a very intuitive way to work with a base mesh, and you can shape things fairly easy. And why is because every time I hold Control, click and drag, it reorders the points of the mesh, and it's That's why it's dynamic. So I can come in and I can shape things. Let's say I start from something like this, or if I start clipping things using the clip curve brush. If I slice here, slice here, slice here, do a curve. Right? I start to affect the mesh, and because of the geometry being now a little bit smushed, if I re-Dynamesh, it reorders all the points so I can keep working, right? And these are the merits of Dynamesh. I can quickly come and block out stuff with changing the topology as I need it, right? So something like that. And I can use some of the simple brushes that we were using. So in other words, like the hard polish, which is, as I said, something of a flattening, but also, you know, like if you have certain planar steps in your geometry, you can come in and polish those up and get the edges really clean. Re-Dynamesh, and with polyframes off, you can see how this is being affected. Now, just at about this point, I might actually turn on project, re-Dynamesh, and it's projecting all the detail that I had thus far in the remesh, right? Again, you can use clay, so BC, clay, and also clay buildup. Both are really good brushes for blocking out and also just kind of layering up some details. So as you saw me do a bust in class, I can come here and use clay H polish to add or build up to the clay. Right? I can size this down by hitting S. And I can develop the shape of this and remesh it, getting all of my topology kind of back in order. You can also use the Damian standard, BD, and just let's say we want some more resolution. So in other words, this would say be the initial blockout, first forms. You remember what I said about using first, secondary, and tertiary forms? So let's say this is a first form. I can come and up to scale this. So I'll choose 128, re-Dynamesh, and if I look at the polyframes, the mesh has gotten a little more dense. And so you would use something like this versus subdivisions. Now, just one thing that you always want to make sure of, and I know I've had my problems with this, and some other people have had their problems with this, is you want to make sure that dynamic is off. Although it does, basically, it gives you a preview of subdivisions on your mesh, it can be pretty problematic using Dynamesh with the dynamic subdiv on. So I'm actually going to click that off and make sure that I'm just working with a straight view, non-subdivided Dynamesh. Because some of the way that the brushes would react on when you try to make an impression on the clay would actually slow down because it's trying to calculate the subdivision while you're actually sculpting. So remember to turn dynamic subdiv off. Okay. That would probably also go for anything like polypainting or a lot of other features. You want to make sure that it's off. Only when you're working with QMesh or something where you know it's a polymesh 3D where you really want to view the subdivisions where that comes into play. So H polish, hide polyframes, and of course again polish. Working with the polish turned on Dynamesh and remeshing polishes the edge, and this is very much close to the same type of features you have in clay polish. With clay polish, probably I believe there's a little bit of difference between the way that it starts to pinch the mesh, but I have a mesh here, and if I just turned on polish, you can notice that wherever there is sort of a hardened creased edge, that the poly order the faces along those edges seem to be a little bit more tight knit, probably pinched and squeezed together, causing that that geometry to harden a little bit more, right? Okay, so remesh again and keep working. So we've used clay. We also use clay buildup. And interestingly enough, clay buildup is one of those things where it's pretty extreme of a brush. But let's see if I can try and affect the kind of stroke that it makes. Not stroke, I believe it's under brush. Just need to get my brush palette out. And of course, if you're unfamiliar, there's a couple of different things with brush that I would check a lot of times. One is, I believe, modifiers you want to look at. And if I turn smoothing on the modifier, like say 1 or 2, and I start laying this out, you notice that the clay that I'm now putting on buildup, it's still a lot harsher than, say, just the clay brush itself, but it's a lot smoother on the surface. And this can be handy for doing any type of clay buildup, and sometimes if you turn it up as far as 2, when you're sculpting organic things like muscle or body fat, it's a good brush to use to build up mass, but also keep smooth, because, you know, like if you're sculpting a female face, you get a lot more cleaner, smoother transitions in the face, where you might not need it as harsh as its default state, right? So I'm just going through using smooth to smooth out, and I'm re-dynameshing with that polish still turned on, H-polish. And so I have a block out here that's kind of happening pretty well. And of course, as I mentioned before, Damien Standard, turning that smaller. And this will give me sort of a deep cut. So if I wanted to make some more like plate-like sort of transitions in the mesh, I could carve that right in. And additionally, let's say if I wanted to make a new relief on the surface of this, I could use Alt. So I'm going to size my brush down a little bit. Alt, going in the negative, right? And use clay, and just fill in this plateau here, right? And so with these basic sculpting tools, there's a lot that you can achieve, especially on the block out. You know, try to think of it as merely sculpting or sketching, more than sculpting, I suppose. And I can re-Dynamesh, and so I have a new relief here. So I can keep using something like the Damien Standard. And of course, if your hand is not even enough, you can go to Stroke, Lazy Mouse, change the Lazy Smooth. If I say between 6 and 8, and Lazy Radius, so about maybe 21, 22, 23, and I can come and do more of a smooth transition as far as the line goes. It's a little bit more fine than hand done stuff. So come in here and make a few lines that are clean, right? So that's a section that I can think about. Come in here and sculpt out a few more lines. And I'm just making impressions in the clay. All right. And as I'm doing this, I'm actually thinking about a couple of things. One is I could use my Zsphere topology to hack some of these parts out, pluck them out, and I'm going to show you that again, plus I'm going to try and use some of the Topology Brush, which actually, I messed around with it a few times versus what I said in class. It can be good for a few parts. You could probably either do the part and once you have it out, you can manage the curves probably at a lower brush size. It's easier to manage. And once you get the part out, you can simply just do a little bit of a split, or split to parts, split to similar parts, and get your topology out. So I'm going to try to run through that. But these sectionalized plates or parts of the helmet are kind of what I am thinking when I'm sculpting this. And of course, always think of ZBrush as sort of I mean, not sort of, but always think of it as a sculpting program. And that, in sculpting, if you draw, other disciplines always come into play. And so this is one of the things that why, I, for myself, when I work, I draw a lot in 2D, and I try to think and visualize those things in 3D as well. It's always a pleasure to think of it that way, because then the two experiences come together. They really come together, especially concepting and finding silhouettes and shapes. So I've got part of a helmet up here. I'm just going to polish up a few areas using H polish, and by the time I Dynamesh again, a lot of this will look very clean. So here's an interesting part. I have part of a step here, and I'd like to continue it. So what I'm going to do is hit B and T and choose the trim dynamic, which is a lot like the hard polish, only I can do this at angles, whereas with H polish it just works with the flat planar view that you're dealing with. So I'm just going to cut in and flatten a section here, a planar section here, and define that. I can do it the same way here and make those two planar shapes come together. And here, yep. So that's starting to look a little bit more rounded out. And if I wanted to polish this up, of course, there's two things. There's BH, which is the H polish. I also have, and some of the brushes that I gave you, BM, some of the Ma cut brushes. Ma polish edger works really good. Ma smooth edge, which smooths out edges. And additionally, there should be one more. I believe I may not have it loaded, but it's the Ma polish brush. I'll try to get that one loaded and show you how it works. But I will try the edger. And this is a polish brush that really works well for polishing out edges. Also kind of smooth some edges out, especially areas like this. It'll just increase that crease a little bit. That planar step. Redynamesh, boom, a little bit cleaner of a concept mesh, right? So PH, do a little bit more cleaning up. And say for here, at the top peak, here at the face, straighten that out, right? Okay, so things are starting to form up. We're now getting to maybe secondary, right? Secondary forms. A little bit more Damien standard. Keep this division going. Because when I read Dynameshed, it did kind of mute some of these details down a little bit. And so I'm just going to drag it out and increase their value just for this plate a little stronger, right? And interestingly enough, BT, back to trim dynamic, if I wanted to get a brush that's small enough here at the top of this helmet, I could come in and just hit along here. Maybe just a little bit wider would work, right? So you could really make get some harder shapes out of those bevels on the inside of this. Right? Define them a little bit more. Okay, there we go. It's going to save. The H a little bit more. And cool enough, one of the brushes I probably have not talked about very much, maybe to a few of you, is also using the layer brush, which is a cool brush. I'm going to actually turn on lazy mouse for it, so BL and their layer brush. And with layer, if I size this up, and I'm going to actually turn its intensity up just ever so slightly, maybe 28. And it's got lazy mouse on already, but I'll just increase that a little bit. And there we go. And I could do something like this. Now, it's working in the positive effect. Of course, if I stroke over this again, it's actually going to layer up. But I'm going to back up and see if I can put on backtrap and see what happens. About the same. About the same. Let's see, backtrack off, and actually I'm going to go in the negative value, right? Some little insets in there. And let's try this. Actually, I'll just take a standard brush. I'll draw a slight mask in this cavity. And I'll invert that. And I'll try using deformation. And in that deformation, I'm actually going to just do like a polish by feature. And when you turn this circle on, it actually affects the mesh a little bit stronger than its regular default solid circle. So I just need a few steps, and boom, it's polished it. Right? And or if I wanted to, I should probably take this, angle it up, hit W, and move it in, and we have a deeper recess inside of there, right? So, you know, just a few different tricks that you can try. I'm actually going to remesh this, make it a little bit cleaner. So this is one top of the head that we have. There's a lot of different things that I could probably do with this shape, but I'm just trying to work out a few basics. So let's just make some cuts again. And I'm just going to go along here, size this down. Make some sort of modular divisions in this. There we go. There we go. And that's good enough for that. And in the reverse, I'm actually going to pull this shape out. Pull here, here, here. And with clay, fill this in again. Not really changing the intensity at all. A little smoothing. Okay, so that will work. And now let's try doing something like, I think you guys have seen Zsphere topology, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do two different types. I think for this larger area, I'm going to do one, and for this front cap, I'm going to do a second. And we'll see where and how we end up as we work along, because both workflows, they do have their place. You know, perhaps my words in class for my opinion on using the Topology Brush are probably pretty strong. I think one is probably a little bit more controlled because it's a point and click method. But if you needed a quick piece of mesh that you plucked out of your concept mesh, you can use the Topology Brush. So again, let's try this. I'm going to go to Subtool and append a Z-Sphere and turn transparency on, and on the inside of this you can see this. Actually, let me pick a material that might be a little easier to see for this. So I'll try just a basic material. So on the inside of this material you can see, or the object, you can see I've appended the Z-Sphere. If I choose it, or actually before I choose it, if I come down, I don't see any of the normal tools that we use, namely the adaptive skin tablet and the edit topology palette as well. They're not going to be there. But if I choose the Z-Sphere, of course, adaptive skin and topology are here. So adaptive skin density 1 and edit topology. But before I edit the topology, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hit E, scale this down. It's that visibility thing that I talked about. So now when I point and click out vertices and edges, I can pretty much see my mesh a lot clearly. And the only rule of this being is that the Z-Sphere has to be on the center of this. So let's start drawing out some topology. I'll just hit edit topology. I'll hit X, so making sure on the transform palette that my symmetry is active. And I'll start clicking out some verts and laying this out. So I want to try to do this in the most simple way possible. So I'll just click hit Q so that you can make sure that you're drawing. 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5. So that's one side of that. I can hit Control, click here, and continue drawing from this point. And I think here and here, here and here might be a good match for this topology. So I'm trying to keep this as low as possible, but give me enough enough angles to get this done correctly. There we go. So in the center again. One there. One there. One there. And one there. Oops. And let's say if you messed up, like say if I clicked here and I messed up, the one way to get rid of unwanted vertices and edges is simply just to hold the Alt key and click on the vert, and that should delete it. I can then hold Control, click on the vertice that I want to continue from, and close the loop. So I'm going to click here, here and here, here, here at the center, and close at the center, and click here and close the bottom of that. So now that's a pretty complete set of loops. And of course, if I needed to move and hand tweak these, I can hit W and just click on the vert and move it along. If for any reason that these don't move, you may control and drag off in the canvas, which is basically a clearing of the mask. Sometimes every once in a while when you get working, it's confusing when it happens, but it does happen every once in a while that you need to clear the mask because some vertices can actually become masked. I'm not sure exactly why that happens, but it does happen, and if it does occur, you can just click and drag off. So if I hit A, I can see the preview for this, and Shift F, polyframe, and I can see how exactly this mesh is coming out, right? So now I've already done topology for this. I'm going to add some thickness. So on the topology, just skin thickness, I'll go in the negative value, pushing into the mesh, so minus 0.05 maybe. and I can check that thickness by hitting A, and as you can see there's some thickness on the inside of this, right? So I think this is ready, and so I'm going to go with this. So I'm going to click on make adaptive skin, and now in the subtool palette, append, and grab my new skin, and it's placed. So now I don't need to mess with the Zsphere anymore. I have the topology piece placed and appended. What I can do is I can just simply delete it. Say OK, and it's deleted. Turn transparency off, and there's our mesh. And when I have a concept mesh that I'm working with this, generally what I do is I just squish down the mesh, because visually it's going to cover it up. It's actually not to exactly the same tolerances as the surface of the concept mesh, but I do have the topology at the bottom. If I turn transparency back on, or even ghost, you can see exactly how the two pieces are overlapping now that I have a separated piece of topology from that. And I can turn this off and just go up to my concept mesh, and what I'll do is turn polyframes off. You can see it piercing through the surface of the skin, and I'll just hit the Damian standard, size it up. On the stroke, I don't need lazy mouse. I'll just do this freehand, and I could just simply ebb out what I don't need. Right? This is one of those tricks that I kind of learned from Mike Jensen long ago, watching some of his tutorials. It's a great method for just clarifying what is needed in the concept sculpt as you're working along, as you're retopologizing. So when things are not needed, you can just really just squish it down into the mesh. I know sometimes if you have a lot of different pieces, sometimes this can be visually confusing, but any of the edges and the gaps, you can totally resculpt and rework while you're working, which is a very good added benefit to this. All right, so I'm just going to ebb this out. I have a new piece. Now, see, with this new piece, there are totally a lot of different things that I can do. And I think I discussed this in class, but now that we have a separate piece and we have topology that is good, yep, not really any problems. Maybe a little folding here, but you know, a little creasing, that's not really going to matter. So let's just hide this and go to, this is part of a newer feature. Before, you know, to harden up some of these edges, and you can still do things this way, is that you would get a selection tool, like a select lasso. And if I wanted to crease any of these, I used to be able to have to take and select and hit crease on just this one piece. And you can still do that. And all of the code in ZBrush is left over so that you can still do that. In fact, in geometry, I believe in crease, you might have turned up your crease tolerance. Let's see, crease tolerance is all the way up to 180, and I could have simply hit crease, and that would crease just this one edge. So as I subdivide, this crease would be totally held for this one step here, this one edge, but the rest really needs some creasing in it to keep its form. So I'm going to undo the subdivisions that I made, undo the crease, and there we go. Already by default, when I made this Zsphere topology and I made an adaptive skin, it actually put in a crease at the very edge. You can see by the very fine dotted line here at the very edge, there's a crease that's set in for the faces, the polygroup faces at front and on the inside and the back along this edge. So if I was to subdivide this, all of the edge is still holding. The actual corners are not holding very well. It's just going to soften out, and that's not exactly what we want. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to show you a few new things of how to harden this up using the ZModeler tools, which are really neat. Just Z, grab your ZModeler, and I'm going to size my brush down here a little bit. What I'm going to start doing is start hovering over the edge. And right now it's insert edge loop is the tool, but if I hit the space bar, I can change it from insert to crease. And I could do this edge by edge, which would be a little bit more meticulous, but you know, it certainly works. If I hit X, of course, I need my symmetry back, because after I've appended a adaptive skin from a Zsphere topology, it's going to undo the topology, right? So you need to make sure that you have it on. Again, checking your transform, active symmetry. So here, if I shift M for the loop tool and I look at this, active symmetry is now on because I hit X. Shift M again and get rid of that loop tool. And so now I can crease, and I could do edge loop partial, edge loop complete, so it would be the complete edge loop, or just a poly loop. So if I had a poly group, I could probably just do the loop that's surrounding that poly group, right? So let's just do this. Make it edge loop complete, and I'll show you. If I click it, it does the complete edge loop in and around this entire normal face, right? And it did the same for the back, so the complete loop. If I do edge loop partial, and I do here, it's going to do it all along here, continuing along the edge loop into here and back down. It probably goes to the back side, right, where the loop terminates. If I do edge loop just by edge, it's just the single edge, and this is actually probably at its base the coolest part, because you can do this piece for piece. I can do here, here, and I can just kind of point and click along the line. I can do edges and keep these, keep this, keep this. I think those were already actually done. Keep this, and here, and just anywhere where I have a bend or a fold in the geo and I want to keep that hard edge, I can just point it and click it. And I think I'm good with that, right? So now I believe I'm good. I could probably take this and subdivide it a few times and kind of preview how it's turning out, or even without subdividing it. This is where the dynamic subdiv comes into play. So I could actually take this, turn dynamic on, and it will give me a preview of the divisions that I would have after making this. So I can see here that I'm getting a softened edge where I wanted actually a softer edge, and there's two ways to handle this even with the creases turned in. I could either Shift D and go back out of the dynamic subdivision. And with this, if I wanted to actually soften this edge out, there's a couple of different ways. I could put a crease in it, but I could also hover against my edge again, hit the space bar, and insert an edge loop. And with that, I could just come down. If I think about how things soften in subdivision, D on. And you notice with the dynamic subdivision, every once in a while when you're looking at these subdivisions, you start to get these handle points here. So that way you know you're in dynamic subdivision. And I believe you can pull some of these and change some of the deformation a little bit, some of the geometry and how it's folding, smoothing, what have you. Yeah, I can pull that and even deform it by handles a little bit more. So, yep. Okay. So I'm going to back out, hit F to frame up my mesh, Shift to lock it into orthographic view, and I'm going to undo a few of those loops, and I'm going to come out of dynamic subdivision by hitting Shift D, and so just now I have like my one subdivision level. This is subdivision level 1. You can see in the geometry that there are no subdivision levels, right? And dynamic subdiv is off, which is perfect. This is what I want. So I'm going to take this, and I believe along this edge here, I'm still on the ZModeler tool, over the edge again, crease, and I'm just going to do edge. So one crease here and one on the other side because I have my symmetry on. And that's creased in the corner. And now if I hit Control D and add a subdivision level, as many as up as I go, you can start to see 5, 6, 7. You can start to see this is subdivision level 7 with I mean, you know, the creasing is there. There's no smoothing of anything. Maybe in a few spots, I think because I did the edge on the inside face, which really doesn't matter because it's going to come out later. You can see that it's smoothing on the inside, but not on the outside shell, which is what we need. So if I was to keep sculpting and working with this in Dynamesh, this is how this piece would round out. Okay. So let's go back. I'm just going to go back to first and delete higher because I don't want to subdivide it yet. And let's turn our concept mesh back on. Let's go save. Okay, let's turn our base mesh back on. And so I have this piece and it's creased and it'll work for future purposes for what I need. I can continue sculpting on this piece, developing it. And it's actually a topologized, correctly topologized piece of mesh. So I'm going to go back to the base mesh. And now let's start to form in some things using the Topology Brush. So I want to try it along this major head piece here, or even, you know, maybe the back here, because this is a nice, almost semi-organic, smooth, hard surface piece. And so now with the symmetry turned on, I'm going to hit B and T and grab the Topology Brush. If I hit Shift M, you can see this a little bit cleaner. Hit OK. Oop. B M. Excuse me. B T is the key. And with Topology, I'll click that one. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and create a curve, because that's exactly how topology works. It works by placing a curve. I'm going to start from the center and drag outward. And I'm going to actually extend against this line a little bit because I want some extra. And that extra I can always knock out or cut off. And so I'm just looking for the actual lines in the contour that make up our shape. I can even get that a little bit cleaner. I can continue as long as there's snap tolerance here to this curve. So if I continue along where the indicator turns green, I can keep drawing this line out, right? So if I just keep going here, I can follow my curve. Oh, get it a couple of times. There we go. And I'm going to actually keep going along its edge. And I'll start from the center here. And connect the loop. There we go. And now that we have this piece here drawn out, I can actually just hold the Alt and delete these. And so we have a clear curve working. It's starting to form up. So again, I'm just going to draw it out here and start from the center again, following the contour. Drawing up, around and over, continuing from the last node, right? And actually I'm going to bring this down a little bit, continue it. I'm going to draw another one here. And from the center point again, here. And actually extend this down a little bit, creating some extra. And along here, there we go. And I can clip here, hitting Alt, and those extra stems, I'll just cut them off. There we go. Man, that's super clean. Okay, there we go, and there we go. And so now I can really think about how many loops I have in this. So let's just start putting in some loops and see what connects. I can start from here, here, or rather, let's try this. It's actually better if it probably connects. One, two, three. So I have I'm actually making an ingon there, which is a no-no. So just gonna back it up. And that's why it's not connecting. It needs to be 4 sides. So along the center. Let's see. One there. And one here. And one along here. One along here. You can slowly try this, and it should probably work pretty well. So as you can see, as I draw these stems out, it's actually closing some of the polys, and that's what we want. There. And let's see, close this off, and close this off. And that's actually gaining more sides. There we go. And maybe one from there. Nope. Let's see what we got here. There we go. Closing that. Closing that. Closing that. And so that looks pretty complete for just the sides. Now we just need to refine the center. And just to keep this clean, I'm going to Alt and make a curve over some of these other stems that are extras we don't need. Sort of the overage of this. There we go. And from here, I'm going to continue on the center. There we go. And if I click here, that's not too clean. Clean up the center score a little bit. The rest is made out, so that's good. I'll drag, line this up, drag down the center. There we go. There we go. And we got it. Just one try here, but I'm not going to worry about it so much. I'll just clean that out. And now that we have a complete piece, so this is going to show on one side, but the actual curves and the rest of the object are duplicate in symmetry on the other side. And so I've got topology here now that I can work with. And I just simply come and hit Alt on the mesh, and boom, I have a new piece. And interestingly enough, I'm going to do this again. If I had chosen to size up my brush, if I made it really big, and I hit Alt and click on the mesh, it would be a considerably thick piece of mesh. If I show Ghost, and I show polyframes, actually it's not giving me my transparency so well, but this is one piece. This is all one solid piece of mesh that has been, retopologized, and it's pretty quick to do. Yeah, so I guess I can't see that really well yet. But one of the things that you'll notice out of Polyframe is that now that you have this one piece, let me do this one more time. I'll lop off this piece here, and I'm going to make a more smaller brush size, maybe about 20. Right there, should be decent. Alt, click on the mesh. I've got my new piece. Now, as you notice, it didn't make a new subtool because this topology piece is still merged with the same subtool. So simply, if I go down to split and do split to parts or split to similar parts, so I'll just split it to parts, say OK, and now as you can see, polyframes on. I've got this piece selected here. This is my thickness, so it had a pretty medium thickness. Actually, it's a little small and thin, but it uses the thickness of your brush size, right? And so, excuse me, if I had chosen to make my brush size a little bit thicker, so would the mesh, right? And now, sorry about that. And so now that I have this piece, I can do similarly some of the same things that I was doing to the other piece. It works in almost the same way. I can even take out some of the creases. So you notice that it put a crease at the center of this object, and of course additionally I'll have to go in and crease some of the other folds in the geometry, and I would have a working piece from there. And again, I can take my concept mesh, turn the polyframes off, excuse me, and now look at it, and I have about the same thing. So I have probably more topology going on in this rear piece, but it's the same. So if it's the same type, similar in the way that the mesh is planned out. I mean, it would be the same as just clicking and pointing, but you have a similar piece of topology now that you can use and sculpt and do whatever you want. So if I hide the rest and I use polyframes to look at it, I have an inside edge, an outer, and the inner edge. I can take and let's just say for giggles, I go into polyframes, or excuse me, polygroups, and I auto group this, or group by normal, and there we go. I have different groups for different normal directions of the mesh, and I could actually hide this piece and hide the inside piece. You notice that when I flipped this, actually it looked empty. This is easy to fix, but if one side doesn't show but the inside does, what you can do is go down to display properties and flip the normal, actually display the normals on double-sided. Similarly, flipping the normal would actually literally flip the normal. It's almost like if any of you have used Maya, flipping the normal will flip the display of the surface normal. Okay, I can hide this, and on polygroups I can group visible, and I have definitively 3 different groups. And back to our ZModeler, excuse me, I can click on the edge, crease, but I can also hit Alt and just get rid of the creasing that I don't need. Right? Because I don't need a crease at the very center of this line. So I'll just go and tap each crease individually. There we go. And so it's out. Okay? And generously so, it put an outside crease on everything. But if I wanted to get rid of that or either add some, which is what I'm going to do, I can just come in, hold over the edge, crease, edge loop partial, and do a partial crease on these edges, get them closed up. There we go. So I did it all the way around. I can additionally do these pieces here. Actually, I'll take that out and I'll just do one edge. Excuse me. I seem to be gripped by allergies today. Sorry about that. And click there. And click there at that fold. here. That should work. And I don't need one there. That's okay if that smooths. And maybe I'll add one there and here. Right? So pretty much that should be hardened. Now, if I hit Shift D, or excuse me, D, and I look at my dynamic subdivisions, this is the kind of surface that I would get. And additionally so, on the dynamic subdivision palette, let me go back up to it and open it. So if I was to look at this, I could apply the present preview to the mesh, and it would actually give me a mesh that has subdivisions. If there's not enough subdivisions, what you could do is go down to Smooth Subdiv, and this is the Smooth Subdivision levels, and I could crank this bad boy up. So let's say I go to maybe 6, and I apply. You see how the preview got a lot smoother if I apply, and now I have up to 7. So it's subdivided up to 7 with 6, right? And if I turn polyframes off, I have a totally clean piece to work from. I mean, the edges of this are totally pristine, which is awesome, right? I could additionally take this, and let's say, for example, I duplicate it, and on that duplicate, I'm going to hide the first shape and only work on the duplicate. Let's say I delete lower on this, right? And since I deleted lower, this is quite dense. And if I go ahead and go to my dynamic subdiv is off, and go to Dynamesh, and I say maybe 224. Oh, excuse me. Let's try 580. And I'll turn polish off, no blur, and Dynamesh it. It has, look at this. It's a Dynamesh, and it's totally clean. Actually, let's do this. Take it out of Dynamesh and re-Dynamesh it again. Oops. Let's go back. Sorry, I made a mistake here just once. So it was Dynamesh already, even though I had a low order of faces. Undynamesh it. And change that to 580. Project is on, blur is 0, and Dynamesh it. Yep, still looks good. Yep, that's our cloned piece. And, you know, you could give this a smoothing wash, kick down some of those hard edges. Smooth out some of the little pinching that's happening at the corner there. And additionally, so I can just keep sculpting on this. I mean, this piece is perfectly fine. It's beautiful. There's a couple of other things that I wanted to show you guys, and I'm going to actually stop this part of the video now that I've recorded almost an hour, and continue on.